The crisp November air nipped at my nose as I stepped onto David and Melissa's porch in Riverside Heights, pumpkin spice latte in hand. "Morning, dear," I called through the partially open door. "Brought you a little something to warm you up." Melissa's voice drifted from the kitchen, sharp and clipped. "Just a sec, Anna." I pushed the door open further, intending to leave the latte on the counter, when I heard her say, "Frankly, Julian, having her round for Thanksgiving just feels stifling." Stifling? That stung more than I'd like to admit. I paused, latte clutched tight in my hand, suddenly unsure whether to advance or retreat. "She means well, I know," Melissa continued, her voice softening slightly, "but it's like she thinks we can't function without her. And ever since she helped us with the down payment, well, it's just changed things." Julian murmured something I couldn't quite make out. "Exactly," Melissa exclaimed, her voice regaining its edge. "It's like she's bought the right to dictate our lives. Besides, with your parents coming, it's just too much." My heart hammered against my ribs. Too much. Their family was too much. My hand trembled, sloshing a bit of the latte onto the welcome mat. "Maybe we can tell her we're doing something small, just us," Julian suggested. Melissa let out a small laugh. "Perfect. We can say we're keeping it intimate this year. She'll understand, or she'll have to." I quietly backed away from the door, my footsteps muffled by the thick rug. The chill in the air seemed to have intensified, seeping into my bones. The warmth of the latte was no match for the icy coldness that had settled in my chest. I walked back to my car, numbly placed the drink in the cup holder. I started the engine, the familiar rumble a small comfort in the sudden silence of my world. As I pulled away from their curb, I couldn't shake the feeling of being discarded, dismissed, like an old toy they'd outgrown. I thought back to the countless times I'd helped David and Melissa, not out of obligation, but out of love. The down payment on their house in Riverside Heights, a seemingly idyllic neighborhood with manicured lawns and 2 car garages, had been a significant chunk of my savings. I'd envisioned us all celebrating holidays together, building memories in that home. Now, it felt like I was being penalized for my generosity. I drove aimlessly for a while, the scenery blurring into a meaningless tapestry of color and movement. Finally, I pulled into a small park overlooking the river. The crisp autumn air stung my cheeks, a welcome distraction from the ache in my heart. I sat on the park bench, watching the water flow by, each ripple a reminder of the ever-changing nature of life. I replayed Melissa's words in my head, each syllable a sharp, stinging barb. Stifling. Too much. Bought the right to dictate our lives. The accusations echoed in the silence of the park, amplified by the loneliness that gnawed at me. But amidst the hurt and anger, a seed of resolve began to sprout. I wasn't some helpless old woman to be brushed aside. I had given freely, out of love, but that didn't give them the right to treat me like this. I took a deep breath, the crisp air filling my lungs. I needed to think, to plan, to reclaim my dignity. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Average house price, Riverside Heights. I typed into the search bar. The results that popped up were interesting, far more interesting than I'd expected. The average price was considerably higher than what David had told me they'd paid. Had they lied? Or was there something else going on? Either way, this new information gave me a glimmer of hope, a starting point, a way to subtly shift the balance of power. I wouldn't stoop to their level with petty arguments or accusations. No, my approach would be far more elegant. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching, making calls, and piecing together a plan. The details were still hazy, but one thing was clear. I wouldn't be spending Thanksgiving alone, and Melissa and David would learn that generosity, like any valuable commodity, comes with a price they hadn't yet realized they were paying. The wheels were in motion, and I, the seemingly discarded grandmother, was holding the steering wheel. Rain lashed against the kitchen window, blurring the manicured lawn David and Melissa were so proud of. I'd just put the kettle on when Melissa breezed in, a shopping bag clutched in one hand, her phone glued to the other. "Morning, Anna," she said, not bothering to look up. "Still here." The casual dismissal stung more than any outright insult. "Just making some tea," I replied, keeping my voice even. She shrugged, dropping the bag onto the counter with a thud that rattled the ceramic canisters. "Suit yourself." She swiped at her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. I poured the boiling water, the steam momentarily obscuring my view of her. "Did you have a nice time with your mother yesterday?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Fine," she muttered, still glued to her screen. "We talked about Thanksgiving." There was a pause, a beat of silence, where the only sound was the drumming of rain. We decided to keep it small this year, just us and Julian's family. My stomach lurched. "Oh," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. She finally looked up, her expression almost apologetic, but not quite. "Space is a little tight, you know, and Julian's parents, well, they can be a bit much." She trailed off, as if expecting me to understand. I stirred my tea, the clinking of the spoon against the china cup the only sound in the otherwise silent kitchen. Tight. Their house was a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial, a house I'd helped them buy, might I add. I'd discreetly covered their down payment, a fact they seemed to have conveniently forgotten. And Julian's parents, they'd spent a lavish Christmas at David and Melissa's last year, a Christmas I'd largely funded, from the overflowing presents under the tree to the catered dinner. My throat tightened. I thought of Thanksgiving, of the years I'd hosted, the endless hours spent preparing elaborate meals, the joy I'd taken in creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere for my family. Now, I was deemed too much, an inconvenience. "Of course, dear," I said, forcing a smile. "I understand." Melissa seemed relieved. "Great," she chirped, returning to her phone. "So, what are your plans for today?" The question felt almost mocking. Did she expect me to slink away, defeated, to spend Thanksgiving alone in my small apartment? "Oh, I have a few errands to run," I said vaguely. "Paperwork, that sort of thing." She nodded absently, already engrossed in another text message. I finished my tea, the lukewarm liquid doing little to soothe the burning in my chest. As I rinsed my cup, my gaze fell upon the stack of mail on the counter, a property tax bill for David and Melissa's house. A casual glance revealed the assessed value. Over $1 million. $1 million. I'd contributed a significant chunk of that, silently, without fanfare, expecting nothing in return. but a place at their table. A wave of nausea washed over me. The enormity of my generosity, their blatant disregard for it, the casual cruelty of their exclusion, it all hit me with the force of a physical blow. I steadied myself against the counter, my knuckles white against the cool granite. "Anything interesting in the mail?" I asked, my voice strained. Melissa shrugged, not looking up. "Just bills," she mumbled. The usual. $1 million house, lavish holidays, designer clothes, all funded, in part, by me, and dismissed as the usual. Something cold and hard began to form in my chest, replacing the burning resentment. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something else, something sharper, more calculated. Resolve. "Well," I said, picking up my purse, "I should be going." Melissa barely registered my departure. As I drove away, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last vestiges of my naive hope. I needed to rethink things. I needed a plan, and as I pulled up to the real estate office on Main Street, a plan began to form. I walked into the bustling office, the sound of ringing phones and chattering agents a stark contrast to the quiet, simmering anger I carried within me. "I'm interested in selling my house," I announced to the receptionist. "It's a 4-bedroom colonial, similar to the ones in the Meadowbrook Estates." Her eyes widened slightly. Meadowbrook Estates was one of the most exclusive and expensive neighborhoods in town. "Certainly, Mum," she said, her tone suddenly more respectful. "Please, have a seat." As I sat down, a small, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. Thanksgiving was just around the corner, and I had a feeling it was going to be a very interesting holiday indeed. Rain lashed against the living room windows, blurring the autumn colors outside. Melissa's daughters, my granddaughters, were sprawled on the rug, building a fantastical castle out of blocks. I sat on the sofa, watching them, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Just days ago, Melissa had told me, as casually as one might discuss the weather, that I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving this year. "It's just going to be us, Mom," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. A small, intimate family gathering. Now, as I observed the effortless way she interacted with the girls, a chill settled over me deeper than the November damp. Something had shifted. "Grandma, look," squealed 4-year-old Chloe, holding up a lopsided tower. "It's almost as tall as you." I managed to smile, my heart heavy. "It's magnificent." "Darling," I said, reaching out to steady the tower as Chloe's younger sister, Lily, attempted to add a particularly large block to the top. "Careful, Lilybug," Melissa cautioned, moving closer. "We don't want the whole thing to come tumbling down." Her tone was gentle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was an edge to it, a subtle warning aimed at me. Had my presence always been this intrusive? The thought stung, especially given everything I'd done for them. The down payment on this very house, for example, the countless loans that had never been repaid, the new car David insisted he needed for his expanding business. "Grandma, can we have cookies?" Chloe asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. "Mommy said we could have some after our nap." "We'll see," Melissa said, giving Chloe a playful nudge. "If you're good." She glanced at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flash of something in her eyes: guilt, resentment, I couldn't quite place it, but it made me uneasy. The afternoon wore on, filled with the usual chaos of playtime. The girls, bless their hearts, were oblivious to the undercurrent of tension in the room. They chattered and giggled, their world a vibrant tapestry of imagination and make-believe. I tried to lose myself in their world, to forget the sting of Melissa's rejection. But it was no use. The realization of my own naivety, of how readily I had poured my resources into their lives, expecting nothing but love and appreciation in return, washed over me in waves. David gets home late tonight, Melissa said, breaking the silence that had fallen after the girls finally succumbed to exhaustion and were tucked into their beds. Big meeting. She busied herself tidying up the scattered toys, not meeting my gaze. Important one, I asked, trying to sound casual. Very, she replied, her voice tight. Could mean a big promotion. She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, he'll be disappointed he missed you. I doubted that very much. Lately, David had adopted Melissa's detached demeanor, his usual warmth replaced by a cool politeness. I wondered, not for the first time, if he even remembered the countless times I'd bailed him out. The silent agreements we'd made, the unspoken understanding that I was the safety net for their extravagant lifestyle. He works so hard, I murmured, picking up a stray building block. It was smooth and cool in my hand, a stark contrast to the burning anger that was slowly beginning to simmer within me. He does, Melissa agreed, her voice softening slightly. We both do. There it was again, that flicker of something in her eyes. Defiance. Justification. I couldn't be sure. Well, I said, rising to my feet, I should be going. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much her words had hurt me. Already, she asked, a touch of surprise in her voice. Perhaps she'd expected me to stay longer, to plead my case, to beg for an invitation to Thanksgiving. But I wouldn't give her that. Not anymore. Yes, I said, forcing a smile. I have some errands to run. The lie slipped out easily. In truth, I had nowhere to go, no one to see, but the idea of returning to my empty apartment, to the silence and the memories, was unbearable. As I drove home, the rain continued to fall, mirroring the tears I refused to shed. The streetlights blurred into streaks of yellow against the darkening sky. I pulled over to the side of the road, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of exhaustion and despair. I rested my head on the steering wheel, the cool leather a welcome distraction from the turmoil within me. How had I let this happen? How had I allowed myself to be taken for granted, to be treated like an unwelcome guest in my own family's life? A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my despair. What exactly was the market value of houses in this neighborhood these days? A flicker of something akin to hope, a small ember in the darkness, began to glow within me. I started the engine, the sound a low rumble in the quiet night. I had some research to do. Rain lashed against the windows of David and Melissa's house, blurring the warm glow inside. I understand, dear, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's your Thanksgiving, your family. I wouldn't want to impose. Melissa's tight smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It's just that Julian's parents taught well. They're quite traditional, she explained, her hands fussing with a napkin. They wouldn't understand. Of course, I murmured, picking up my purse. David hovered awkwardly by the door, his face a mask of guilt. "Mom, are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Absolutely," I replied, forcing a bright smile. "You enjoy your Thanksgiving, sweetheart." I kissed him on the cheek, the forced cheerfulness draining from me with every step toward the car. The rain had intensified, mirroring the chill that settled deep within me. As I drove, the streetlights blurred into streaks of gold against the dark, wet asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel, the leather cold and slick beneath my fingers. Thanksgiving, a holiday meant for family, for togetherness. And here I was, driving away from my son's home, rejected, dismissed. The image of Melissa's perfectly set table, the aroma of roasting turkey still clinging to my clothes, mocked me. It wasn't the missed meal that stung. Not really. It was the blatant disregard, the implication that I was an outsider, an inconvenience. Julian's parents wouldn't understand. What wouldn't they understand? That I'd helped David and Melissa buy this very house, that I'd consistently supplemented their income, allowing them to live a lifestyle far beyond their means. I pulled over, the sudden stop jarring me back to reality. The rain hammered against the car roof, a relentless drumming that echoed the turmoil in my heart. I reached into my glove compartment, pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook. It contained a meticulous record of every check I'd written to David and Melissa over the years. Down payments, mortgage installments, car repairs, even their extravagant vacation to the Bahamas last spring. The numbers blurred before my eyes, a testament to my misguided generosity. A wave of nausea washed over me. How had I let this happen? How had I become not a loving mother, but a silent, enabling benefactor, a walking, talking ATM? The truth, stark and unforgiving, hit me with the force of a physical blow. I'd been so blinded by my desire to help, to see my son happy, that I'd allowed myself to be taken advantage of. I started the car again, the engine sputtering to life, a faint echo of the resolve that was slowly hardening within me. I wouldn't confront them, not yet. Accusations, tears, recriminations, they wouldn't change anything. They wouldn't undo the years of quiet enabling, the unspoken resentment that had festered beneath the surface of their polite smiles and grateful words. No, I needed a different approach, something subtle, something that would make them understand the true cost of their comfortable life, the real weight of their dependence. As I drove, a plan began to form, nebulous at first, then slowly solidifying into a concrete strategy. I remembered an article I'd read recently about the rising housing market, the astronomical prices homes were fetching in David and Melissa's neighborhood. A flicker of an idea, a seed of possibility, took root in my mind. I pulled up to my own quiet house, the familiar comfort of its solid walls a stark contrast to the emotional turbulence I carried within me. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a glistening sheen on the pavement. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air a welcome balm against my flushed skin. As I walked toward the front door, I couldn't shake the image of David's hesitant face, Melissa's forced smile. They thought they had everything figured out, their little charade of independence perfectly maintained. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea of the quiet storm brewing on the horizon. I had a feeling this Thanksgiving would be one they'd never forget. And neither would I. Rain lashed against the windows, mimicking the turmoil inside me. I sat at my kitchen table, a stack of bank statements spread before me like a grim deck of cards. Each line item, each withdrawal, each check written a testament to my unwavering support for David and his family. How could Melissa have said those things to me? I whispered to the empty room. Her words, "You're suffocating us with your help," echoed in my ears, a cruel counterpoint to the rustling leaves outside. I had always believed I was helping them build a life, a stable foundation for their future. Now, staring at these figures, the sheer volume of my generosity hit me with the force of a physical blow. Over the past 5 years, I had quietly covered their mortgage payments, paid for Melissa's extravagant Christmas gifts, even funded their annual family vacations. It was supposed to be a safety net, I muttered, picking up a statement from last December. A hefty sum. Mark Julian's ski trip stared back at me. Julian, Melissa's brother, a constant presence in their home. David never even liked skiing, I remembered, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. He'd always preferred quiet weekends at home, reading or tinkering in his workshop. The realization that I'd not only been supporting my son and his wife, but also her extended family, sent a wave of anger coursing through me. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, the warmth doing little to soothe the chill that had settled deep in my bones. As I sipped the tea, my gaze fell on a real estate flyer tucked under a stack of mail. It advertised a beautiful colonial-style house in David's neighborhood, almost identical to his own. The asking price was significantly higher than I remembered houses in that area going for. That's odd, I thought, grabbing my phone. I opened my browser and started researching recent home sales in the area. Property values had indeed increased, but not by this much. The flyer seemed inflated. A slow, dawning realization began to creep into my mind. Could Melissa be? I trailed off, the thought too uncomfortable to complete. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. I spent the next hour poring over online listings, cross-referencing prices and locations. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. The flyer Melissa had casually left on the kitchen counter during my last visit, the one she'd dismissed as just something Julian picked up, now seemed like a deliberate act. She wants me to believe their house is worth much more than it is, I murmured, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Why? What was she trying to achieve? Suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. A conversation I'd overheard between Melissa and David a few months ago, snippets of which now resonated with chilling clarity. Refinancer loan investment opportunity, they'd whispered, their voices hushed as if they were discussing a secret pact. I closed my laptop, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me. The rain outside had stopped, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I felt a strange sense of calm, a quiet resolve hardening within me. They think I'm a fool, I whispered, a cold smile playing on my lips. They think they can take advantage of my generosity, use me for their own gain. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the streetlights glimmering in the darkness. They're wrong. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a real estate agent I knew, a sharp, discreet woman named Sarah. Sarah, it's Anna, I said, my voice steady. I need a favor. I paused, taking a deep breath. I need you to appraise my son's house. Discreetly. I gave her the address, adding, and Sarah, don't mention me. Tell him it's a standard market evaluation, something the bank requires. I ended the call, a sense of anticipation thrumming through me. This Thanksgiving, things would be different. They wouldn't be carving up my generosity like a turkey on the table. This time, I would be the one serving up a surprise. The thought brought a flicker of satisfaction, a small victory in the face of their betrayal. But the true reckoning, I knew, was yet to come. I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Rain lashed against my window, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. I sat at my desk, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face. Riverside Heights average mortgage. I typed into the search bar, my fingers hovering over the enter key. A wave of weariness washed over me. This wasn't how I envisioned spending my evenings, calculating the cost of other people's comfort, a comfort I myself had provided. I clicked enter, and a cascade of numbers filled the screen, each digit a tiny stab at my pride. Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, they all sang the same tune, a melody of escalating prices, a chorus of six-figure mortgages. 400,000, I muttered, my voice catching in my throat. That was the median price, a figure that danced in my head, mocking my naive generosity. 400,000, I repeated, the words heavier this time. I remembered the day David, my son, had called, bubbling with excitement. Mom, he'd said, his voice brimming with pride, we found a house. In Riverside Heights, he'd paused, then added, almost sheepishly, it's a bit of a stretch, but Melissa loves it. I'd felt a pang of concern even then. A stretch, I'd asked gently, already sensing the unspoken request hanging in the air. Well, you know, David had stumbled. The market's crazy. We might need a little help with the down payment. Of course, dear, I'd replied, my heart swelling with a mixture of love and apprehension. Anything for your happiness. Little did I know then how much that little help would truly entail. Over the years, the requests had trickled in, a constant drip, drip, drip eroding my savings. The roof needs repairs, David would say, his voice strained. Unexpected medical bills, Melissa would explain, her tone apologetic yet firm. And each time, I'd reached into my pocket, driven by a deep-seated need to ensure their happiness, to protect my son from financial strain. Now, staring at the stark figures on the screen, I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The stretch they'd talked about had been a chasm, bridged entirely by my hard-earned money. They were living a life I'd inadvertently financed, a life that didn't seem to have room for me. The thought of Thanksgiving, just weeks away, brought a fresh wave of hurt. We're having a small, intimate gathering this year, Mom, Melissa had said, her voice carefully neutral. Just us and Julian's family. The unspoken message hung heavy in the air. You're not invited. I closed my laptop. The image of the $400,000 house seared into my mind. I rose and walked to the window, watching the rain turn the streetlights into shimmering halos. A quiet resolve settled within me, a steeliness I hadn't felt in years. It was time to take back control, to subtly shift the balance of power. I wasn't looking for revenge, not exactly. I wanted to remind them, gently but firmly, of the foundation upon which their comfortable life was built. I wanted to see a flicker of recognition, a hint of appreciation in their eyes. I opened a small, antique wooden box on my desk. Inside, nestled amongst old photographs and letters, lay a stack of documents, their edges yellowed with age. These were the records of every payment I'd made towards David and Melissa's house, every little help that had added up to a substantial sum. I ran my fingers over the crisp paper, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. "Hello, Martin," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Yes, it's Anne. I was hoping we could schedule a meeting next week. I have some financial matters I'd like to discuss." Martin was my financial advisor, a shrewd and discreet man who had handled my investments for years. He had always cautioned me against overextending myself financially, but I, blinded by maternal love, hadn't heeded his warnings. "I want to explore some options," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "Options for restructuring my assets. Perhaps setting up a trust, something to ensure my financial security in the long term." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And Martin," I added, a touch of steel entering my voice, "I'd like to explore ways to incentivize responsible financial behavior within my family." I ended the call and returned to the window. The rain now gentle drizzle. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a promise of a new dawn. I had planted a seed of doubt, a seed of awareness. I knew it would take time to germinate, but I was patient. I had time, and I had a plan. The Thanksgiving invitation, or lack thereof, suddenly seemed insignificant. I had bigger things to worry about, bigger games to play. The subtle shift had begun. The crisp November air nipped at the edges of the curtains in my living room. I sat by the window, a steaming mug of tea warming my hands, my gaze drifting across the frost-kissed lawn. It had been a week since Thanksgiving, a week since Melissa had so casually dismissed my presence at their holiday table. "We just want to keep it small this year, Anna," she'd said, her voice laced with a sweetness that felt more like saccharine. "Immediate family only." The words echoed in my mind, a hollow counterpoint to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was a quiet I'd grown accustomed to, a solitude I'd embraced for years, even before my husband passed. Now, though, it felt different, heavier somehow. It was the quiet of being deliberately shut out. I swirled the remaining tea in my mug, watching the leaves circle the bottom. How easily things had shifted. Years ago, when David, my son, had first introduced Melissa, I'd welcomed her with open arms. They were young, starting their lives together, and I wanted to help. I wanted to give them the kind of start I never had. "Anything you need, dears," I'd told them, "just ask." And they had. First, it was help with a down payment on their apartment. Then, when Melissa landed a job in another city, it was the moving expenses. "It's just temporary, Mom," David assured me. "We'll pay you back as soon as we can." Temporary, of course, stretched into years. The apartment became a house, a charming little place in a nice neighborhood. "We found the perfect place, Mom," David had beamed, showing me pictures on his phone. "But we're a little short on the down payment. Just a small loan. We'll have it back to you in no time." I'd smiled and agreed, happy to see them settled. The small loan turned into regular monthly supplements, helping them cover the mortgage, then private school tuition for their two children, then a new car when their old one broke down. Each request was prefaced with reassurances of repayment, promises that faded as quickly as the ink on the checks I wrote. I sipped my tea, the warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled deep inside me. I hadn't minded helping them, not at first. David was my only child, and seeing him and his family happy was all that mattered. But somewhere along the way, my generosity had become an expectation, my help a given, and now I was being shut out, deemed not immediate family enough to share a Thanksgiving meal. The realization had struck me with the force of a physical blow. I'd spent years quietly enabling their lifestyle, silently picking up the slack, and now I was an inconvenience, a burden. The thought stung, a sharp, bitter taste at the back of my throat. I'd spent so much time, so much energy, ensuring their comfort, and in return, I received this. But the sting had also ignited something else within me, a quiet resolve, a flicker of steely determination. I had spent my life being accommodating, putting others' needs before my own. It was time that changed. It was time for me to take back control. I had started subtly, planting seeds. During a phone call with David a few weeks before Thanksgiving, I'd casually mentioned looking at real estate listings in his neighborhood, just curious about the market. I'd said, my voice light and conversational, thinking about downsizing, maybe finding a place closer to you. I'd heard the slight catch in his breath, the almost imperceptible pause before he'd responded. Oh, really, Mom? That's interesting. I'd pressed further, innocently inquiring about average house prices, feigning ignorance about property values in his area. He'd stammered a vague answer, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. Then, a few days later, I'd sent Melissa a seemingly harmless text message. Just thinking about Thanksgiving, I'd typed, wouldn't it be lovely to have everyone together? Maybe next year we can host at my place. It's so spacious, plenty of room for everyone. I'd added a winking emoji, masking the underlying message. My house, my rules. The reply had been swift and curt. We'll see, Anna. Now, a week later, I sat in my spacious house, the silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message from David. Mom, it read, can we talk? Melissa and I need to see you. It's important. A small smile played on my lips. The bait had been taken. I set my teacup down, a sense of anticipation settling over me. The game, it seemed, was afoot. I replied simply, of course, dear. Come anytime. I knew what this visit would entail. Apologies, excuses, promises to make it up to me. They would want to smooth things over, to reassure me that I was still part of the family, and they would, of course, want to make sure their comfortable lifestyle remained undisturbed. But I had a different kind of conversation in mind. It was time for a little truth-telling, a little readjustment of expectations. It was time for them to understand the true value of family and the true cost of taking generosity for granted. The chill in the air had vanished, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea in my hands. This Thanksgiving, I hadn't had a seat at their table. But the next one would be different. The next one, they would be sitting at mine, and they would be eating humble pie. The quiet of my own home felt strangely unfamiliar after the turmoil of the past few weeks. Thanksgiving had come and gone, and the echoes of Melissa's words, "We think it's best if you don't come this year, Mom," still rang in my ears. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, watching the light catch it, a stark contrast to the dull ache in my chest. It had been a difficult decision, selling the old family cabin. Generations of memories, summers spent canoeing on the lake, roasting marshmallows around the fire pit all gone. But what choice did I have? I needed to know. I needed to see how far this charade would go. My lawyer had assured me the transaction was discreet, the buyer anonymous, a shell corporation set up solely for this purpose. The money, a substantial sum, had been wired directly into my account, not David's. It had always been my money, of course, a nest egg I'd intended to leave them eventually. But the way things were going well, I needed a clearer picture. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Mom, are you in there?" It was David. His voice was hesitant, almost fragile. "Come in, dear," I said, setting my glass down. He shuffled in, looking like a scolded schoolboy. "Mom, we need to talk." "About Thanksgiving?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "About everything," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "Melissa and we haven't been completely honest with you." I simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. "The house," he began, his voice trailing off. We can't actually afford it." My heart sank, even though I'd suspected as much. Years of mortgage payments, car loans, even Julian's extravagant law school tuition, all funded by me. They'd been living a life they couldn't sustain, and I had unknowingly enabled it. He finally met my eyes, his own brimming with tears. "Mom, we were so embarrassed. We didn't want you to think we were failures." "Failures," I repeated softly. "David, owning up to your struggles doesn't make you a failure. Hiding them does." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "We told you we had a good deal on the house, that we were managing fine. But we weren't. We were barely keeping our heads above water. And the renovations?" I asked, remembering the gleaming new kitchen, the landscaped garden, the expensive outdoor furniture they'd showcased with such pride. We charged most of it to your credit card," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "We told you we'd paid it off, but we haven't." He closed his eyes, shame etched across his face. "We've been so stupid." "Stupid?" "Yes," I agreed, "but perhaps not irredeemable." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "David, do you know who bought the family cabin?" He shook his head, looking utterly bewildered. "I did," I said quietly, watching his eyes widen in disbelief. But how?" he stammered. "We thought we heard someone from out of state bought it." "Through an intermediary," I explained. "A shell corporation." It was quite straightforward. He stared at me, speechless. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. The anonymous buyer, the sudden influx of funds into my account, his own precarious financial situation. "The money," he began, his voice shaking. "The money from the sale is safely in my account," I confirmed. my voice firm, where it belongs. David, I've supported you and Melissa for years. I've helped you build a life, a home. But that support wasn't a blank check. It wasn't meant to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford on your own. He looked down at his hands, his knuckles white as he clenched them. I know, Mom. I know we messed up. We took advantage of your generosity. Yes, I said simply, you did. He looked up, his eyes pleading. What are we going to do? I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the familiar street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawns. You're going to learn to live within your means, David. You and Melissa. You're going to create a budget, pay off your debts, and start being responsible adults. And as for the house, I turned back to face him. The house is a beautiful one, a good investment. His eyes flickered with a glimmer of hope. So we can stay for now, I said, my voice laced with a touch of steel. We'll discuss the terms later. But understand this, David. Things are going to change. I will not be enabling this behavior any longer. You and Melissa will need to prove that you can be responsible with your finances, with your lives, and with my trust. He nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. He knew this was a second chance, a chance he didn't deserve. He knew I was right. He stood up and walked towards the door, then paused, turning back to me. Thank you, Mom, he said quietly, for everything. I simply nodded, watching him leave. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. Things were going to be different. The charade was over, and I, for one, was finally ready to take back control. The quiet of my home no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt like a sanctuary, a space where I could finally breathe, knowing that the pieces were falling into place, just as I had planned.